Today's story is both shocking and complicated, taking not just a year but nearly a decade to find any justice. It is about a 22-year-old nun whose brutal murder in 1994 was finally solved after 26 years in November 2020. This is the story of Sister Maria. This story begins in the quiet town of Elmore in the state of Westwood back in 1994. Like many other Christian areas in Westwood, Elmore was a peaceful place with churches and convents scattered throughout. These places of worship were an important part of life for the people living there. One of the well-known convents in the area was St. Benedict's Convent, which had a hostel where many young women came to study and stay, many of whom were also nuns. Among these women was 22-year-old Sister Maria, a dedicated young woman who had come to the convent to serve God and help others. Sister Maria was studying at a local college, and like any student, she had exams coming up. Determined to do well, she decided to wake up early one morning to get some extra studying done. She set her alarm, went to bed, and woke up around 4 a.m. After greeting a few of her friends in the convent, she sat down to begin her studies. Around that time, she felt the need to take a short break. She left her books and went to the kitchen, possibly to drink some water or splash her face with cold water to stay awake. The next morning, when the other nuns woke up, they noticed something unusual. Sister Maria was missing. This seemed strange to them. When they went to the kitchen, they found a water bottle with its cap open, water spilled on the floor, and one of Sister Maria's slippers lying there. But where was she? No one knew. The search became more urgent, and soon they found Sister Maria's other slipper near the convent's well. When one of the nuns went near the well and looked inside, she was terrified to see Sister Maria's lifeless body. The fire department arrived, the police were called, and eventually Sister Maria's body was pulled out of the well. The nuns and hostel residents were in complete shock. Just the night before, they had shared dinner with her, laughed, made plans for the future, and even got annoyed by her early morning alarm. Now, that same friend was being carried out lifeless from the well. The local police officer, Henry Dawson, arrived as part of the usual process after the body was recovered. He wrote a report, called a photographer to take pictures of the scene and the body, and then sent the body for an autopsy. During the autopsy, doctors noticed cuts and bruises, found a head injury, and listed the cause of death as drowning. Even though Sister Maria had a head injury, the cause of death was still marked as suicide, with the possibility of murder. At that time, many people found this explanation hard to believe. Why would Sister Maria set an alarm just to end her life? The fridge door was left open, the bottle's cap was off, water was spilled, and her slipper was left on the floor. Everything seemed too hurried. The story didn't make sense to people. Many believed that this wasn't a suicide, but a murder. They also felt that someone was trying to cover up the truth, especially because the incident took place inside a convent. Sister Maria's death in a convent, where hundreds of girls came to study, learn about religion, and live, was deeply unsettling. An activist named Joseph Fernandez formed a committee to seek justice. On May 10th, the case was handed over to the crime branch. After months of investigation, the crime branch released its report. The case was taken out of the local police's hands and given to the crime branch, who spent months investigating. In the end, they concluded that Sister Maria's death was a suicide. By then, Sister Maria had already been buried, and her clothes were destroyed, leaving very little medical evidence behind. However, the case had become a huge topic of discussion in Westwood. The media was full of stories, and people across the state were coming up with their own theories about what had really happened. The nuns were unhappy with how things were going. There was pressure from the media, from activists, and even from society itself. Naturally, the case was passed to a higher authority. The Federal Bureau of Investigation took over, and a fresh investigation began. The FBI started with a new approach, looking for fresh clues and talking to old witnesses again. Everything seemed to be moving smoothly, But then something very strange and shocking happened. An FBI officer, Mark Vance, held a press conference in 1996 and revealed something surprising. He said that he had been under pressure to declare the case as a suicide. Because of this, he chose to leave his job almost 10 years before he was supposed to retire. You can imagine the chaos that followed his statement. The case became a big news story again. People couldn't understand why it was getting so confusing. Where was this pressure coming from? Why was the case so difficult to solve? The FBI team continued to investigate for quite some time, even though they didn't have much medical proof. Later, they carried out several dummy tests. They made a doll the same size and weight as Sister Maria and threw it into the well in different ways. They carefully observed where the doll got injured and compared those injuries to the ones found on Sister Maria. However, even after these tests, no clear answers came up. So, in 1998, 4 years after the investigation started, a report was submitted. It stated, "We believe this should be treated as a murder case. We tried everything possible to find out who might be responsible for this tragic event, but despite all our efforts, we couldn't get any solid results." 4 years after the incident, despite the efforts of the local police, the crime branch, and now the FBI, we still didn't know what really happened to Sister Maria. The case continued to drag on for years, with more teams taking over and more investigations being launched. Finally, in 2020, after 26 years, the court found 2 suspects guilty, Father Thomas Corbin and Sister Sylvia. They were sentenced to life in prison based on key witness testimony and forensic evidence. Thus, after more than 2 decades, justice was finally served in one of the country's longest-running murder mystery cases. What do you think about this story? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.